work with the community. My question for you is, you said that you're interested in doing programs. Is there possibility of, there's a new software high school in New York City forming. A lot of the middle schoolers on the island are very, very interested in sort of applying for that school, but they've never had any coding experience. Would you be interested in the possibility of having some kind of mentorship program with middle school students on the island?
Yeah, we should definitely talk about that. I think the biggest challenge I'm personally feeling right now in this whole K-12 space is there are an incredible number of options. And we're just trying to figure out what is the most helpful. Now, the other thing I said is that whatever we can do with the school here on Roosevelt Island, we're going to do it. And that is a priority of ours, regardless of all the other programs. So let's definitely talk about that. I want to manage expectations. The number of faculty and students in the early years is very, very small. So we're not going to have a huge number of people that can actually go out and mentor students or do whatever it takes. These programs are going to have to grow over time as the campus grows, but that kind of thing sounds great. Okay. So we should talk more about it.
And my second question for you is, Cornell and a lot of other institutions, but recently Cornell Landscape Design School, Architecture School rather, did a study of the island. Is Cornell open to doing, I know that you just recently did a specific study on the new campus area, but are you open to having any kind of island-wide studies or having your students from your different schools?
Yeah, we are actually, and I've actually had a couple of graduate students and a couple of faculty reach out and say, what are the opportunities there too? And when we say we want to participate in the community and K-12 is important, but there are other ways to do it, this is the kind of thing a university can bring to a community, is this great talent or research or whatever. And so we'd certainly be open to participating in any kind of island-wide review. So again, we should just talk more about how to structure that.
Yes, sir, you have a question?
Yes, hi, I'm Kenneth Flynn of Transportation Charter. I was just curious if there's any kind of...
One second, hold on a second.
I'm sorry.
I was just curious if there's any kind of overall height limit or any type of constraints that are helping to shape and mold the campus plan.
Say your question again. I didn't catch
If there are any kind of height limits or any type of constraints that you guys already have that are helping to mold and shape the...
So my understanding is there's really no height limits that we're coming close to needing to worry about. So height is not an issue. What we are doing is working with the city on creating a special district here, zoning-wise, but height is not an issue from what I understand.
Okay. Anyone else from the public before I go to the board members? Okay, I'll start left to right. We'll go in that direction. I see Annie. Yes, Terry, go ahead.
Yeah, following up on that gentleman's question about height limits. I'm looking at your rendering here, and you mentioned 150,000 square feet. And it looks, from the rendering, like the tallest buildings you're building from north to south start near the bridge. Which buildings would be built first? And I think height is an issue for a lot of people because the bridge is a symbol in and of itself. It opened up Queens, you know, it's part of the development of New York. So would you have your tallest buildings next to the bridge? And how, I mean, do you know any of these concrete details yet? Are there...
I know some, I certainly know our philosophy, and I don't know specifically where we would end up with height. And those would be the kinds of things we would be talking through with the community and with you as this process keeps working out. The reason I quickly took off that pretty picture is because that was part of the proposal. That is not where we are now. So this is the academic building, and the academic buildings, which will be the most northernmost building, like to be shorter and wider. So what you will see there, our faculty would push for something like 4 stories. You may end up seeing something like 8 stories, but it's not 50 stories, it's not 20 stories. So that's where we are. So it's very much changed since that other picture.
My other question, there are people who couldn't come tonight, is the whole issue of Goldwater Hospital. You know, I mean, this used to be called Welfare Island at one point.
Yes.
Blackwell Island and then Welfare Island, and now it's Roosevelt Island, and you have this monument happening, a memorial. I'm wondering how this will, because this is, for a lot of people, is a difficult transition. There are patients there now. Where are they going? how will you proceed? Is the fact that you're starting from north to south dependent on which buildings can be emptied out first, or how, because that to me is a mystery and to a lot of people.
I'm really glad you asked that question also. So my understanding is the decommissioning of that hospital was just, and you all should correct me if I'm wrong, was decided before this Applied Sciences campus was even part of the thought process of anybody. So that has been in the works for a while. Cornell does not have possession of the land yet. It's still an active hospital, as you know. We will take possession, so this hospital is scheduled to be decommissioned by late fall of 2013. We, Cornell, will not take possession until December of 2013. The patients are going to go in two places. One is to the north end of the island, is my understanding, some of them, and the other is to a new facility in Harlem. That is actually a project that is also underway, so has become a little bit of our critical path process, because we obviously need to make sure that the patients are respected and taken care of before we can do anything with this hospital. So nothing will happen to the site until early 2014, and we have possession, and then we will demolish the hospital. Now, it's really in effect one large building. It's connected, so you do have the boomerangs. But certainly we're not going to do anything with the hospital while there's still patients there.
Oh,
Yeah.
Of course.
One couple quick, hey, Lathan, there was did that email go out to the board members that I asked?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So that was regarding that issue.
No question about that?
Yes.
Let me mention one other thing about the hospital. There are some murals in the hospital that, are people aware of the murals? Yes. People are, yeah. So we committed to restoring the murals. One of them, you can see now, the rest are under paint. And so we have challenged our museum director from Ithaca, and she's working with some experts, she's fabulous, to figure out how do we actually remove them, they're huge, and get them restored. And then we will work with architects and others to think about where do they go when they're done. So, but we will protect the murals.
One other quick thing here, the gentleman who's holding the camera there, his name's Rick O'Connor, he's a blogger, he did speak to me beforehand, I said go ahead. I do have a question for you, there's no way to cut that light down, is there, that you have on the camera there? It's just a bit bright.
It is right.
Sure.
And I don't have sunglasses to wear, so if you can't do it, I understand, but that's fine. Okay. We'll move on. Other questions from the board? Yeah, we're on left, Marco.
You mentioned that this project is going to be net zero energy and at the same time sustainable. Do you think that you're going to reach this level? Because one thing is net zero energy and another thing is sustainability.
Correct.
Because it cannot match both, especially seeing the vision of the professional where they put completely glass. So basically, then become the issue of sustainability. Mm-hmm. By the way, first, before I said you're welcome with this project, and I would like to support constantly this project.
No,
but then my concern is basically when you talk net zero, which is great, by the way, but at the same time you talk sustainability, it doesn't mean the same. There are two completely issues. And seeing the view of the main campus doesn't reach sustainability.
Yes, and you are absolutely right to point out that the image we showed before, and I don't want to go back to it because it gets planted in everybody's mind, it actually wasn't glass, it was a kind of reflective surface that it looks like glass, and our engineers are saying you can't do that if you want to achieve your goals. And so this impacts the design.
Yes.
Pete just told me, the reason I didn't hear that question a couple questions ago, that the announcement of the architect is now online. And so we've selected a wonderful architect for the first building. It's a firm called Morphosis. And one of the reasons we were so impressed with them is they have done phenomenal thinking about sustainability and things like net zero and how do you achieve that. So they are not going to design a building and then figure out how to make it energy efficient. You will never get to net zero that way. I know that much, and I'm not an architect. You need to start with it as your principle up front and say, we're going to think about this as a really critical goal. How do we design the building? All that being said, the net zero part, the engineering around it the discussion primarily has focused on a couple of techniques so far. One of them is using photovoltaics on the site, obvious, and the second one is geothermal, another standard technology. We're also thinking about the obvious question about things like tidal power. Don't know that it's quite there yet. I know there's certainly activity in that area, and whatever else we can. The technology in this area is changing so fast that by the time this thing gets built, I'm sure it'll be a whole other set of technologies. As far as net zero versus sustainability, we're legally committed with the city. So first of all, net zero is for the academic building. That's what we're talking about there. We are legally committed with the city to be a minimum of LEED silver for the entire campus. If we're net zero for the building, my understanding is they aren't equivalents in some ways in how you talk about it, but that's LEED platinum and plus to go net zero. And so, again, I'm no expert here, but certainly they're compatible ideas.
I think definitely LEED is a very good, very complex system, but
Yes.
when they reach the real level of sustainability, they don't reach the level at all.
So, well, we should take this offline so I better understand what you mean by sustainability, but that's very helpful.
Okay. Questions over here? Yep, we'll start left to right. Yes?
I just have a question. Is it possible, can we get the presentation on the board's website? Or
Can we get it
someplace,
on-
or do you have it on yours, if you give us
Yep.
the style,
Yeah,
where we can find
if we
it?
get a copy of this in PowerPoint, then I assume that's how we get it, or in
Or
PDF.
PDF.
Or
And
if you give me
so-
your site where it's on display?
But let me just ask, so later we get a copy PDF, we can put that on our site, right? Sure, okay. Yeah, that'd be, if you guys don't mind. Okay. All right, thanks.
I have a few
Yeah,
questions.
okay, Judy?
You keep talking about K through 12. Are you talking about doing a new K through 12? Or are you talking about implementing what's already here on the island? Are you talking about doing a new
You mean
K
a new
through?
school?
Yes.
No, we're talking about a lot of things, and we've been talking to a number of people all over the city, both concerned parents, the chancellor, people in the school system, people out of the school system, to see what would be impactful. We are not talking about a new school on the island. When I talk about working with school children on the island, I'm talking about the existing schools. But we're also talking about having far greater breadth across New York City, and there are many ways you can do that. There are new schools coming up all the time. Could we partner with one of those? Do we really want to focus on one high school or one middle school, or do we want to think about more breadth? And those are the kinds of things we're trying to consider.
Okay, I wasn't quite sure when
Yes.
we were talking about that. The new building in New York City, is that going to be a new building? Are you, for the 5 years, are you taking an existing, I know you can't commit to what it is right now.
I want
But-
to tell you.
But I
It's a
mean,
secret.
I guess what I want to know is it going to be existing or is it going to be new building?
Yes, it's existing. It's existing. It's existing space in Manhattan.
Okay, okay. Well, we hope it's in Community Board 8, that's all we can say to you, which is 59th to 96 from Central Park to the river, including the island. Okay.
We'll tell you soon.
Okay. And then my last question, and I think I understood your answer to Sharon's question about the ULURP, but when you do the ULURP, which is for the whole project, and you're going to be having 1 or 2 or possibly 3 buildings that you're going to be concentrating on now, what happens when you get ready in 2019 to start planning another building? Although the city will have done the ULURP and it will have been approved, will you be coming back to the community board with each individual building as you're doing it, whether ULURP requires it or not, to have this dialogue with the community?
So I know for sure that as far as designs go, we get designs reviewed and approved. As far as going back to, I need help. You guys know?
I think as a general course of the way Cornell's openness is to the entire process, I believe that in 2019 or thereabouts, Cornell will want to come back to the community and will want to come back to the community board to let you know they're starting phase 2 and what phase 2 will include. But I think the ULURP process and the scope of what is decided upon now within the ULURP is is what we'll be talking about, and so Cornell will be operating in that as-of-right frame from.
I got that, but I want to know, the future buildings that you can't possibly foresee now, because they will be different architects, but all within the same. I just want to make sure that you're going to keep the community involved.
Absolutely. As each design and each building comes up,
And each architect is hired.
and architects are selected, we'll certainly be sharing all of that with the community.
My last question to go along with this is, you said Skidmore Owens was picked as, they're the master architect planner.
They've been helping us with the campus plan.
Now, so as these individual architects like
Morphosis.
is picked, will they be in turn working with SOM so that this vision and whoever else you pick in the future, so that this vision is continued?
So the goal of our campus plan now is to document our thinking in a way that anybody could pick it up. So when we're all gone, 15 years from now, it's not going to require the same people that were sitting going through this amazing thought process to say this is what we meant. So that's why we're spending so much time now actually documenting it, so that it doesn't rely on the word of mouth of individuals over time to do that. Certainly, there were a number of us that have been engaged in this process, and so it's very easy to do now, but 15 years from now, presumably, we want to make sure that we have it in a way that addresses, here's all the good thinking that went into it.
Good.
Larry?
Yeah, hi, thanks. I have three questions, and the first one relates again to the design and process. You guys haven't selected an architect, or will be selecting an architect, but the scoping meeting is going to be on the 22nd. And I haven't read the scoping document yet. I just read a little bit of the summary, and I would hope that there are some specifics in there in terms of the zoning guidelines and the special district as to what underlying zoning rules will need to be modified as part of the special district, so we have a sense of what ultimately, without knowing what the building will look like, what we may call the building envelope. And I would assume you want to do that because you don't want to be in a position like the developer in Willis Point recently found himself and decided that he didn't comply with the zoning that the city wrote for him, and now he has to go through ULURP again. So I hope that the scoping document has enough specifics so we know what zoning is going to be modified. As an island resident, I'm concerned about the construction impacts, and whenever new construction occurs on the island, there's been always a suggestion of looking into the possibility of using boating barges to bring and to take stuff from the construction to the site. And I hope you're looking at it, considering that you have a 20-year build-out. We only have one street in the island that goes through half of the development, and the helix at the end of the bridge is in constant need of repair. So I hope that the scoping document takes that into account. And my third comment and question is, as a community board member, the community board is always the official link in terms of the ULURP process for providing the recommendation representative of the community through the process. And I hope that the community board is actually the primary contact in terms of your contacts with the community, whereas we can always open up our meetings are always open to the community, we always have discussions with the community. But I was somewhat troubled that you had your first meeting, which unfortunately I can advance, an open house, which was not part of the community board process. And I would request, if Nick feels it appropriate, that the community board be the main point of contact throughout the process.
So I actually appreciate that, and appreciate the input on all those points. Certainly all of these have come up before. As far as the time, my recollection is that we had a scheduling issue. We absolutely wanted to have this meeting.
The town hall meeting was something that was requested for us to do with the elected officials, and that was a request that had gone in straight to President Scorton for through one or more elected officials, and we honored that request. And from the very beginning, we said that we wanted our initial introduction to be with the community. Every community board member was invited to that event, and we, as part of our town hall meeting for April 5th, spent considerable time as part of our protocol. I think we did something in the neighborhood of 35 meetings with elected officials, stakeholders on the island before we went public with anything. And we actually offered Community Board 8 an executive briefing that we asked at the time not to be public because we were trying to honor the elected officials' request of doing the first public meeting on the island with everybody all at once. So that's how that came about. And originally, I believe, Nick, if I'm correct, we had agreed to do that, and then we agreed that everything should have been public, which we were fine with, and we had a
We had a meeting. We agreed on a meeting, but then, but you, I think, right, my point, I think, was that any meeting we have must be open to the
public,
public.
and at
And
at that point, we had said that, well, we had committed to the elected officials that our first meeting would be a public town hall on Roosevelt Island.
Right.
And then, I believe this actual meeting has been moved 3 or 4 times before we actually got it on the agenda tonight. So this has been over a month and a half in coming.
So just in the future, I mean, where will you, as you proceed through the process, will the community board be the first?
Community groups on Roosevelt Island. We'll continue to meet with individual stakeholders. We'll continue to meet with the community board. We'll continue to meet with all the elected officials who are involved in the process.
They're going to be separate meetings, or they're going to be, everybody's invited to every meeting?
Well, I mean, I don't think we can have a 300-person meeting
I don't think you have
300 times
300 people.
between now and then. But certainly any meeting as part of the ULOR process, the public scoping meeting, the certification department, city planning, the community board, the borough president, back to city planning, and then the city council, those are all public meetings. The meetings we do, some of the meetings we do with elected officials are private, simply because of space limitations. Other meetings we do with buildings by buildings, and we have a group of about 12 or 15, what we tend to call internally the leaders of Roosevelt Island, and it's sort of an unofficial thing, but they're the leaders of the major groups on Roosevelt Island. We've been doing this pre-RFP, and we'll continue to keep doing
So I think what Pete is saying is, absolutely, Community Board 8 is a critical group that we hope you continue to invite us to speak to you, and we'll certainly be doing that over the months to come.
I have a problem with that comment that you hope we invite you. I think you have an obligation.
We have both.
And I would hope that if you have a concern about the numbers and all that, that when you arrange for meetings, that perhaps a member of this committee is invited to that meeting as a representative of the board. In that way, you're not subject to having a public meeting, but I have trouble if the board finds out information after other people find out. And in other large projects that have been handled, let me finish, in other large projects that have been handled in the city through ULURP, the community board is the main conduit for the flow of information.
I think that's very helpful, thank you. So what I personally hope we can do is make this a very open process, and that's what we're trying to do by talking to people that want to hear about this. So we've got to figure out the sequencing. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. This gentleman here has his hand up here.
I just wanted to mention, Larry, that we're very fortunate that 3 of the members of the Roosevelt Island Residents Association, including our vice president, are members of Community Board 8. We've been getting updates from Ellen Polovey, our vice president, as to what Community Board 8's participation has been, and the communication can and will go both ways.
Yeah, and it's important here also, and that's part of the reason we have the task force, because the task force is made up of members of various committees. You have a zoning and development committee, transportation, education, So what we tried to do here is to have people who are relevant to this project, and also so that when that becomes sort of part of the ULUR process as well, we want to have those people knowledgeable about what is going on, and we're going to communicate and try to figure out what makes sense from our standpoint also.
And perhaps what we should do is set aside a number of meetings between now and the entering of the project into ULUR. Maybe it's,
Yeah, and that's,
clearly,
I agree with you, that's a good.
clearly there are, milestones we're going to have in the project.
Right.
And we're going to want the
Because
board
your point's well
and
taken, we don't want to surprise you with anything.
Right, and I agree with
And our goal
Larry.
is just to be open and, let the sun shine in with everybody.
Yep.
Okay, all right, I'm going to go back to, Jeffrey, did you speak? Oh, you had a, yep, go ahead.
I have a few questions.
Yep.
The first question I have is, I'm sure you're aware that the related is signaled they're going to proceed with buildings towers 5 and 6. My first question is, how have you contemplated in the CPI the construction and selling that project that possibly could be coincide, will be coinciding in the 20 years we build that? How have you thought of that impact on the business and also the island itself and the construction that is coinciding with it?
Specifically, so I had heard, not officially, that may happen. To me, it comes back, I think your question's about impact on the island, especially construction traffic again, that somebody else raised, and I get it.
Critical path method?
Yeah. The project plan.
The project
plan. So I really don't know their timing, but clearly just thinking about construction materials on and off the island and construction traffic is a big part of what we're looking at. I mentioned that we've hired Tishman, and this is their most urgent task, is to really think about it in the context of everything else that's happening.
Right, but just to follow up to that, I think it would be beneficial for Tishman to reach out to Marinick Construction as well, to coincide with William Hudson's schedule.
Yep.
Because, we understand.
My understanding is they may do something a little earlier, I just don't know.
Well, that's the thing. They've been given the go-ahead and they've received the funding. They've decided that they're going to pull the trigger, but as this current schedule is set up, it's coinciding with the demo.
Sure, we need to connect with them.
The second, so along the same lines, the second as to the implementation for the site. What is going to happen? I understand you're going to be building from north south. What is going to happen with the rest of your project property? Are you going to decommission each of the buildings and demolish all? So what's going to happen with the open space, or how is that going to be built?
Right, and so the idea is that everything is demolished early on. So we're not going to leave part of the hospital for 10 years to be sitting there. So it will be a clean site. As far as how do we treat that open space, if you remember on the list of principles, one of the things I said is you feel like you have a complete campus every step of the way. That's absolutely part of what we're thinking about. How do you make the open site attractive and in a place you want to be? And that doesn't necessarily mean a manicure lawn, getting back to things like wastewater and things. There are a number of different ways you can do that, but part of the planning every step of the way will be to think about that open space and how do you make it attractive and usable.
I'm sorry, just the last question is, you've spoken already about a new zoning resolution or special district that you're going to be applying for your area, and also that you've also said that there's a master plan that's going to be, you're developing. Mm-hmm. Are you planning to enter both of those documents as part of your ULURP application, and if so, when will those documents be previewed for public comment prior to entering into the process?
Yes, so I don't remember the timing on the zoning. I'm going to have to get back to you on that. That's in process also.
Because is it going to be one in which we will be understanding and as
right.
ULURP together in conjunction versus separate process?
So I don't even know. Does anybody know what the legal requirements and the timing of those are?
Legislation.
What's that?
Zoning is legislation.
Yeah,
Jeff,
exactly.
Jeff, I'll get back to you.
Yeah, we'll get back to you on that. It's a great question. As far as the master plan document, yes, we certainly want to share what we're thinking with people.
Okay, Judy?
Since Larry alluded to the scoping document, since the meeting is the 22nd.
22nd.
Yeah.
City.
Any questions that need to be answered will come up. If I can answer you, send it to Latha, then that's the way we're going to distribute it. It'll go to Latha, and then those answers will come back to the members of the task force.
That's how we operate.
Okay? Any other questions I have from you or any other members of the public who want to ask any other final questions here?
We will make the campus accessible, and you will be able to get back the campus. Yes, it will be accessible, not just 24 hours, but it will be accessible. Yeah. I understand your question. Yes, the waterfront will be accessible. I can imagine, I don't want to mislead you, I can imagine times where you need to deliver something and there will be the need to shut down part of a road or get access to a piece of it to get something on or off the campus as you would with any project. But accessibility is, again, part of absolutely what we've committed to. I think that's a great idea. Sure. I think that's a great idea, and we will be back to you. If there's a problem with that, I can imagine why there would be.
Sure, that's great. And I'll explain that we'll print up some hard copies for people who want hard copies. If you want a hard copy, please email Latha, and so we'll have it sent right to you. Yes.
Roosevelt Island residents have their own representatives in addition to the community planning board. I would just hope that we would not filter information only through the community planning board and make sure that our own representatives have access to that same information.
Our information is public also, so they have access, everyone has access to the community board information. You can call that number and we can provide you with whatever you also. If there's questions, we're very tonight to need answers for you. Yes, please.
Of course, everybody should be on cb8m.com if there's anyone sitting in this room from Roosevelt Island that is not on there, including you folks. You should be getting the updates from the community board because this is just one of the things that they're talking about, and if special meetings come out on a short notice, Latha does upload to everybody who's on cb8m.com, who's on their mailing list.
That's a good mailing. That's a community board mailing.
And our email address is info@cba8m.com. Anybody else? Anybody else? Okay. Yes, Jessica.
Just that we should for the task force going forward, how do you envision, how are you envisioning next meeting proceeding schedule-wise and whatnot?
What I'm going to do is ask for input from every task force
By October 1st, and then I think, if I'm remembering right, we have to be certified the way the calendar of the meetings fall by October 28th or 29th is our deadline for certification. So we imagine will be, and then 60 days beyond that will be the community board piece, and then 30 days beyond that is the borough president's recommendation, and then 50 days beyond that is 60 days is city planning, and then 50 days is the council. And obviously, if there's a question in scope, we go back, we stop for 15 days. It goes back to city planning, goes back to the council, and the clock kicks in again.
Okay,
So
that part I know.
So we think we'll, if we get on the clock October 1st, we believe by May 23rd will be, the ULURP clock will reach zero.
Okay, so what happens between now and October 28th besides the scoping meeting?
So I think what we need to do is we need to hear from Nick on how he wants to go forward. We need to sort of come back and figure out what are the important timelines that we'll have to discuss with the task force that we see coming up between the 22nd and, mid-September before we get into ULURP, because our opinion is that the more informed we have the board members, the better and smoother and more organized the process will be.
Educated board members do best possible. Yeah, Lathan, you had, hold on one second. Lathan has a hand.
I just have a question. My concern is that we haven't scheduled again to come to another committee at the end of the month. I just wanted to ask you if at this point you would be ready to come to that committee, or do you think we should postpone the question?
Well, based on my conversation with Nick, he was going to go back to the members of the.
Let me speak to them first. They had specific issues regarding senior issues that they wanted to ask you about, and so let me speak to them about that. I want to get a pretty good idea of what their thought process is there. We talked about it a little bit. I talked to Ellen on the phone a bit.
So even to come into the board office.
I don't want to have 100 meetings of separate committees either. That's, to me, seems, and I said that part of what I said to Ellen is that we want to have this meeting first to really understand what's going on, and it's better if we can funnel most of this stuff through the task force if possible. There may be some separate issues that, we don't want to burden everyone with 100 meetings either, but we want to make sure we do our due diligence, okay? And that's important to us. So anyway, I'm going to go back to her and talk to her about that later, and then we will figure out what makes sense. And I need to hear back from the task force also and decide how we want to proceed.
And then once you guys caucus and do that, we can start on either this week, next week, and then lay out a schedule between now and mid-September.
Right. Okay, Larry.
Yeah, this is in terms of the process. They have the scoping meeting on the 22nd. I think there's a 30-day or a 21-day period after that for written comments. I forget what.
That's public comment. That's a public comment.
And then after that date, they can draft the final scope of work and begin work on the draft EIS, which has to be completed before the ULURP starts. So I don't think there's anything in the official public process that happens after the scoping meeting, but in terms of that timing.
No, but clearly, we've been meeting with folks here on the island, Manhattan and Queens, for what seems well over a year. So we're ready to keep, going through the rest of the next 15 months right on through to the completion of the year.
Okay.
And then beyond.
Right. Yeah. Okay, anyone else before we wrap up here? Okay, I want to thank you. I want to thank members of the public for coming out tonight. I want to thank the board members of the task force, and then send me your emails. If you could help me